On this segment of Truthout Interviews, I welcome Ayanna Banks Harris, contributor to Truthout, who recently spoke to Monica Simpson about a case involving a stand your ground law and the uneven application of that law in the criminal justice system when it comes to gender and self-defense. The interview is entitled The Forgotten Mothers, and you can read it on Truthout. Hello, Ayanna. Thanks for being on Truthout Interviews.
Hi, Ted. Thanks for having me.
There's a statistic in the piece that you did on Truthout where you interviewed Monica Simpson, who mentioned that 70% of the women in women's prisons are mothers. 70% are mothers. And that statistic is just sort of mind-boggling. It makes me wonder about a couple of things. One, what happens to the children? But one of those 70% is a particular inmate named Marissa Alexander, who's at the centerpiece of your interview. If you could tell us a little bit about her to help the readers and our viewers of Truthout know a little bit more about her case and why it's kind of unique.
Yeah, Marissa Alexander's case is an agglomeration of many ills that plague not only our society, but the criminal justice system. She stands bound at an intersection of inconsistent application of stand your ground laws, the rigidness of mandatory minimum sentencing, and the prosecution of women who are the interrupters of violence being inflicted upon them. And when we look at Marissa's case, Marissa was 9 days postpartum at the time of the August 2010 incident in which she fired one warning shot to ward off her estranged, abusive husband, who at the time of that incident threatened her, assaulted her, and held her against her will. She was prevented from leaving the home at the time. At that time, her 9-day-old child was actually in NICU and was actually born 6 weeks prematurely. When we think about this, we tend to think about Marissa and the mothers, but there are 1.3 million children who have mothers who are either incarcerated or on probation. And so we always have to broaden the conversation to make sure that we are including the children. Marissa was breastfeeding her child at the time. And so what then happens is while she's incarcerated, her child is prevented from receiving the nutrition of breastfeeding.
In the case of Marissa Alexander, she fired a warning shot at her husband, who was estranged, who was abusive, and now she's serving, or she may serve up to 60 years in prison for this?
Yes. So during the initial trial, she was found guilty of 3 counts of aggravated assault with a deadly weapon for firing that one shot because there were also 2 children, 2 of her stepchildren were present at the time. Once she was sentenced, the judge allowed for those 3 charges, which carried a 20-year mandatory minimum with that to be served concurrently. Prosecutor Angela Corey is seeking for Marissa to have to serve those consecutively if she is found guilty in the retrial, which is slated to begin at the end of July.
Now, she had a recent hearing, right?
During the course of the initial trial, Marissa was denied immunity under the stand your ground. And there are many things that were unjust in that. In fact, one of the witnesses has since recanted. So this is why her lawyers are advocating for a new stand your ground hearing. And so today, the lawyers met with the judge, and the judge chose not to make a decision today, but he will continue to receive written arguments throughout the rest of this month, and in June make a decision if she will be granted a new stand your ground hearing.
What state is Marissa being tried in and also held?
She is in Florida. The prosecutor in the case, Angela Corey, was also the prosecutor in the George Zimmerman case as well.
Which is interesting because it's the same sort of law that's being applied here.
One of the issues is that many of us did not know about Marissa Alexander until George Zimmerman murdered Trayvon Martin. And as the narrative began to change that, George Zimmerman stood the chance of being granted immunity under stand your ground, did other stand your ground cases come to light. And one of those cases was Marissa Alexander. And at that time, she had already been incarcerated for more than a year.
This is a prime example of the uneven application of this stand your ground law Here you have George Zimmerman, who murders Trayvon Martin and walks. And then you have Marissa Alexander, who doesn't even injure her husband. She fires a warning shot, and she could be facing up to 60 years in prison.
Yeah, correct. And one thing to note is that with the stand your ground, George Zimmerman ended up waiving a stand your ground hearing. But he, as we do know, even though once he went to trial, he ended up being found not guilty. But that is why many people have come to Marissa's defense, is because here it is, a woman could quite possibly face the rest of her natural life in prison for harming nobody. And we have instances where people have actually taken another life and they are free to walk around.
And it doesn't seem on the face of it to have any logical sense to it. She was, unless there's something within stand your ground that you can't fire a warning shot. So I'm trying to figure out, what exactly is she being prosecuted for? Was it putting her other children in danger? Was it, I mean, I'm trying to wrap my head around exactly why is it that the prosecution is being so severe with her?
I think that's a question many of us continue to raise, especially when Angela Corey then stated that she was seeking to have Marissa spend 60 years in prison, when during the process of the initial trial, Angela was willing to offer a 3-year plea deal, which to date, Marissa spent approximately 3 years in prison. So we don't know. We honestly don't know. And the fact that there were 3 counts, so to look at Rico Gray, the estranged husband, and consider him a victim is alarming for many people.
As we said at the outset, and we've mentioned a couple of times, it's the unequal application of a law, and it has fallen as an injustice on a woman who was just trying to defend herself from an attacker who happens to be her husband, and fired a warning shot. That warning shot landed her into some legal hot water, and using the stand your ground laws, it is almost as if the law is saying, unless you are being physically harmed, meaning that this person had their hand around you or something like that, which is around your neck, which is not the case, because the stand your ground law, from what I understand, is that if you feel threatened, you have the right to defend yourself. Right.
And it continues to illuminate the issues with stand your ground, because Florida lawmakers just recently added a warning shot amendment, if you will, to stand your ground law. So the fact that stand your ground was never intended to protect a woman like Marissa Alexander or anybody who chose not to take a life, but to fire a warning shot, it makes you wonder why such a law was ever written and allowed to be entered into the books.
Yeah. One of the other things that frames your interview is the concept of reproductive justice. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, so Monica Simpson with SisterSong works diligently surrounding cases involving reproductive justice. And reproductive justice is simply the right to have children or to not have children, and to allow those children and those families to be raised in safe and healthy environments. So Marissa Alexander's human right to parent her children in a healthy and safe environment was violated due to domestic violence. And that is something that happens in any home where domestic violence proliferates.
Well, Ayanna, I want to thank you so much for being on Truthout Interviews, and to encourage people to read the interview that you did with Monica Simpson. It's called The Forgotten Mothers, and it is on Truthout. Thanks again for being on the program.
Thank you so much for having me.
And thank you for watching Truthout Interviews. I'm Ted Asregadoo. See you next time.